So we're ready to start our session on the future of peer review. I'm very happy to be moderating this session on behalf of COPE. My name is Vivienne Bachelet. I am founder and editor-in-chief of MedWave, a general medical journal based in Santiago, Chile. So I'm very happy to bring the perspective of the Global South to this session, hopefully. I'm also an MD, I have a master's of science in clinical epidemiology, and I teach evidence-based medicine in the University of Santiago of Chile. These are our speakers today. I'm very happy to introduce Louisa Flintoft. She is Senior Publisher Director from Wiley. She oversees a portfolio of multidisciplinary open access journals and is responsible for Wiley's Editor Experience and Engagement program. She has over 20 years of experience in scholarly publishing, including previous positions as editor-in-chief for Nature Reviews, Genetics, and Genome Biology. The second speaker is Avi Staiman. He is CEO of Academic Language Experts and SciWriter.AI. Avi is the founder and CEO of Academic Language Experts and the co-founder of SciWriter.AI. He is also a chef at Scholarly Kitchen. Oh, my heart beats for Scholarly Kitchen. Co-host of the New Books Network Scholarly Communication podcast, and a core member of Kangaroo, where he represents EASE, that's the European Association of Scientific Editing or something like that, I think, in creating legislation and policy for the responsible use of AI in research. And the last speaker is Sven Fund. He is Managing Director of Reviewer Credits. Sven he has held prior positions at Bertelsmann, Springer Nature, De Gruyter, ResearchGate, and Wiley. Okay, so those are the three speakers. Each will have 15 minutes for their presentations. But before going to the presentations, I just want to launch a very quick poll. The question is, are you from an institutional setting with fully resourced, with research integrity offices, or an institutional setting with no research integrity office? Are you from a high-impact, fully resourced journal, a smaller, less resourced journal, or none of the above? So this is the way of gauging where our audience is coming from. And do I get to vote? It seems I don't. Okay, I see that there are people, so okay. We'll wait just a few more seconds because voting is coming in. And I am going to stop. I'm going to end the poll now. So basically, we have 30, so the largest share is 34% of yay, smaller, less resourced journals. I'm happy to report. This is, I'm very happy about that actually, because I think the smaller and less resourced journals are the ones that can take excellent advantage of everything that COPE has to offer. There's also a very large share of people coming from high-impact, fully resourced journals. Those are the large journals that have all of the things that we've been talking about in all of these days, right? And there's also a smaller percentage, a very small percentage of people coming from universities with no research integrity office, and a few also from larger universities, institutions that do have research integrity offices. And a fair share of people that are none of the above. So I expect them to be funders or just, I don't know, whatever. You can put that on the chat box or in the questions. Good. So now we know where we're coming from. And after this poll, we'll have a couple of more later on. I would like to hand the floor now to Louisa so that she can begin with her presentation.
Great. Thanks, Vivienne. Okay, hopefully I'm sharing my screen successfully with my slides. Not so used to using Zoom, but I'm sure someone will let me know if I'm sharing the wrong screen. Thanks so much, Vivienne. So my name's Louisa Flintoft. I'm a Senior Publishing Director at Wiley, and the topic of my presentation today is looking forward to 2030, what are the challenges and solutions for peer review. And I want to thank COPE and the organisers of the session for giving me the opportunity to present. So Vivienne has already introduced my experience and background. I just wanted to explain a little bit more about my own personal interest and experience in this topic. So I have been working in publishing for more than 20 years. A good 14 years of those 20 were as a journal editor, so handling manuscripts, and a big part of that, of course, was organising peer review. And through that, I gained a lot of insights into both the enormous value that peer review brings, but also the challenges that come with it. And I think also really relevantly, I didn't mention it on this slide, but I think it's important to note, in my last couple of years during my time at Wiley, I've been very actively involved in the enormous amounts of work that Wiley has done to address the large-scale research integrity issues that I'm sure people have heard about on the Hindawi portfolio of journals, a big part of which was manipulation of the peer review process. So it's a topic that still holds great interest to me. And full disclosure, I'm employed by Wiley and I benefit from the company's commercial success. Okay, so why am I talking about peer review in 2030? So when the organisers of this session were in planning mode, they were reflecting on this spot-on report that was published in 2017, which was a collaboration between Biomed Central and Digital Science. And so this was looking at what might peer review look like in 2030. And you can see the recommendations from the report to the left on the slide here. And I think these are a good reflection, thinking back to my time, I was an editor at the time, the sorts of things that were on people's minds with respect to challenges and opportunities in peer review. So finding and identifying peer reviewers, the diversity of peer review pools, peer review models, training, and so on. There was quite a long list of things that I think we wanted to achieve as journals and publishers. So where are we now? Fast forward to 2024, and there are a couple, I would say, of really big challenges that have changed the scene since that report was put together in 2017. They were in there amongst those list of recommendations, but have become really much more pressing challenges. So the first thing is the increased volume of submissions. There's been a huge increase. Journals are receiving many more papers. And of course, in many ways, that's a great thing. It represents the participation of a larger number of researchers from across the globe. But of course, it brings its challenges because to assess more papers, you need more peer reviewers, and that we know has become a struggle. And we hear of editors who, invite dozens, tens of peer reviewers without securing enough to make a decision on a manuscript. So it's a real challenge. And the other area that has been really apparent in the last few years is research integrity. Back in 2017, for sure, research integrity issues existed, but over the last few years, we have seen an unprecedented level of research integrity problems and increasing sophistication of the people behind those problems, such as paper mills, who really look for every opportunity to exploit any gaps in the publishing process. And so, of course, this means that publishers have had to divert attention and resources to managing investigations at scale, as we did with the Hindawi situation, which can lead to delays in correcting the literature. So clearly a big challenge for us in terms of peer review. So the good news is that there are a lot of initiatives in play to address these problems. I'm going to talk more in a minute about the move towards more proactive screening of manuscripts by publishers to reduce the burden on peer review. There's a great deal of excitement and interest in the potential of artificial intelligence. I'm not really going to touch on that. I know the next speaker will do. I think really importantly, there's been some fantastic collaboration that's really making a difference. No individual journal or even publisher can tackle large-scale issues of research integrity on their own. It's a publishing ecosystem problem and needs to be addressed at the ecosystem level. And so we see collaborations both among publishers, for example, with the STM Integrity Hub, but also bringing together more diverse groups of stakeholders, such as United to Act. And there's also been some great work in terms of, for example, standardized guidance and policies on peer review, the recent NISO peer review terminology, and the STM guidance on generative AI in scholarly communication being two great examples. So as I mentioned before, I want to dive in a little bit more to the importance of proactive screening. Publishers are increasingly doing much more screening on papers, learning as they go along. Things are evolving all the time. So it's not that publishers didn't do proactive screening previously. Certainly, for as long as I was editing journals, there were proactive screens for plagiarism. So many publishers integrated Authenticate into their systems, for example. But publishers are doing more and more of this. The idea is that we want to stop problematic papers as soon as they enter our systems or as early as possible. To reduce the pressure on the peer review pool, we need to stop problematic papers from even getting to the point of peer review and definitely from being published. And of course, this makes a lot of sense all round. It's much better to address the problem rather than have to correct the literature after peer review. And these checks run all the way through the publishing process, from screens at submission and at the phase of peer review as well. So publishers, including Wiley, have introduced checks, introducing more all the time, for example, to identify verify the identity of peer reviewers. So in the situation with Hindawi, there was absolutely a problem with people manipulating, stealing, making up identities. So really key that publishers are able to do that. Another thing that publishers can do is we have a lot of data in our systems. And one thing we learned from the Hindawi experience was that we can really leverage that data to look for patterns that indicate that there's some suspicious activity going on. Now, the important point I wanted to make here was that to enable all this to happen at scale, because we are talking about really large numbers of papers, this is meaning that publishers increasingly need to harmonize their workflows and processes. So historically at Wiley, and I'm sure other large publishers with a long history, there have been almost an infinite number of different varieties of processes and setups on journals, depending on what the needs of the editors or the community were. And that's fine. In the past, that was fine. There were fewer submissions, there were fewer integrity problems. That was a manageable situation. But now we do have to take this approach because of the changing situation with respect to research integrity. We need to be able to apply screening and checks at scale. We need to use technology, and we need to use large teams of internal experts. And this can cause a pain point because it means that publishers we still provide differences in workflows. We understand that different communities have different requirements, for example, in terms of which peer review model works best for them. But to be able to operate at scale in this way, we're having to harmonize and reduce that level of variety amongst our systems and processes. And this can be a pain point. You know, I completely understand that editors get very used to working in a particular way, and it can be a wrench when a publisher asks you to start doing something different. So I think it's really important for publishers to get really good at articulating why this is so important, so that we can allow editors to worry less about integrity. Obviously, they still play an important role, but worry less about that and focus on their roles. I wanted to highlight a really exciting example of collaboration. And so this is the example of ORCID trust markers. I'm sure this audience all knows already. So ORCID is a not-for-profit organisation that provides researchers with unique identifiers that they can link their affiliations, research outputs with. So ORCID profiles also contain trust markers, and these are validated pieces of information. They are added and validated by ORCID members. So, for example, a research publication, Wiley would validate that on an author's ORCID record. And I think this is really exciting. A variety of publishers contribute to this, and it means that we're all benefiting from each other's experience of the individuals who enter our system and the work that they're doing. So as well as giving people credit for the work that they do, it also means we build up a profile of how much validated activity is associated with individual researchers. And that can be peer review activity as well as a research publication. And this is exciting. There's positive feedback in this system. The more that publishers contribute, the more information they get that they can use to look at who is in their system submitting papers and carrying out peer review. And really excitingly, at Wiley, we have a new system, Research Exchange, which is our system for submission, peer review, and integrity checking of manuscripts. We are continuing to build that and roll it out to journals. And one of the really key principles has been a big focus on research integrity. And excitingly, we've been able to integrate into Research Exchange these ORCID trust markers and actually visualize them to users in the system at the time that they need them. So if you're an editor and you're looking at potential peer reviewers, you can see the trust markers associated with the people who might be on your list and use that to inform your decision about who you pick to review a manuscript. So returning to this slide, is this list still the right one? I think it is. I'd be really interested to know if people feel that there are any gaps. I've put a tick next to the areas where I feel like we've made progress. I think one topic we could discuss is diversity in reviewer pools. I think that's been more challenging and there's more work to do there. So all these things I think continue to be important, but I guess I wanted to emphasize that we do have these challenges at the moment, the challenge of volume and this challenge of very determined actors infiltrating systems and causing problems with research integrity. So we really need to work together as a community to think about how we continue to address these problems. And I will end there. Thank you very much. And I will hand back to Vivienne.
Thank you, Louisa. Yes, challenges, volume in manuscripts, and availability of reviewers, misconduct and research integrity issues. And solutions are coming up, such as proactive and AI-based screening of manuscripts, ORCID trust markers, and much more. So now I will hand the floor to Avi Staiman.
Thanks so much, Vivienne. Appreciate it. Great to be here. And thank you very much for the invitation. I've already learned something from my colleague Sven that having a shorter bio does a better job. So I'm going to take that on board for the next time I speak. So I want to speak about a topic that no one feels strongly about, AI and peer review. In fact, it's not anything that raises any eyebrows. And I want to try and move the conversation a little bit from what I perceive to be the kind of emotional gut, existential question to more of a pragmatic one. And what I mean by that is I think that we all have strong opinions, either based on our own experiences, experimenting with AI and maybe failing, or even just hearing about it from colleagues or friends. And the conversation has become, you generally, is at what I like to call 30,000 feet, right? It's very philosophical. It's very charged emotionally. And I think that it's our role and our job as scientists or those who are, jobs are to make sure that science is spread and distributed properly, is to actually have a scientific discussion around the question of AI in the peer review process. Just a quick note about myself. I'm the CEO of a company called Academic Language Experts, which is an author services company. I also, you may see some of my posts on Scholarly Kitchen, and I'm a chef there. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'll mention that I represent the European Association of Science Editors on the Kangaroo Forum, which is an attempt to bring together publishers, funders, universities, researchers in order to create policy around AI. I will say that it is a very ambitious project. My hat's off to those who are organizing it. I don't know if it will be able to keep up with the progress that AI keeps up in, but I think it's a good attempt nonetheless. So I want to make a case for using AI in peer review, and I will start by with a disclaimer that I will not be giving the other side of the argument. I think we all know the other side of the argument. We all know about the misinformation and the hallucinations and the hurdles that we need to overcome in order to actively use AI in the peer review process. And I think hopefully by now you've come across some of those challenges, and nothing I'm going to say today discounts any of those challenges. But I want to look towards the future and ask, what is the potential use for AI in peer review if we can overcome what I see as not inherent hurdles in the process, but technical hurdles that can be overcome through technology, through human feedback loops, and through constantly working together with the technology providers to improve them. So I'll tell you what I've seen so far in, I won't even call it the peer-reviewed literature. I'd call it more the preprint literature, because there's a lot of researchers who are working on this challenge, this topic. And I'll tell you what some of them have been able to accomplish, which I find to be really fascinating. And I can try to share a little bit more if you're curious to dig in. I'll give you some resources in order to do that. So first of all is that actually AI, when prompted properly, can be much clearer, can create a much higher degree of clarity for the researcher in terms of the feedback that it provides than sometimes humans can. And that's because we can actually structure it in a way where, yes, we try to give structure to the human reviewer, but oftentimes even us as editors, as the editorial staff, will turn around and say, we're not really sure what the reviewer wants or exactly what they mean, or or maybe they're not being clear enough. And AI can actually help that level of clarity in a way which is a little bit more objective. Number two, the second possibility or the case for using AI is its ability to comprehend a tremendous amount of literature. Even the top Nobel Prize winners, or those researchers that you may know that are your top reviewers that just have this phenomenal recollection for the papers in their field. As the literature expands, and that's something that Louisa mentioned, right? As we have more and more papers, any honest researcher in a field that's not entirely niche will turn around and tell you, listen, I can't possibly know everything that's going on in my field, right? I do my best to keep up, but it's just the literature. I mean, I know in Corona times, I think the literature doubled, right? So we just don't have that capacity to actually sift through and find it. And what we find with AI is it can actually, in theory, it can actually do a pretty good job of sifting through tremendous volumes of literature, find that needle in the haystack, and actually that is relevant for the exact conversation. So instead of having what I would like to call a biased, kind of review where it's, Johnson is the reviewer and then they're critiquing the researcher for not quoting Johnson in their article, which is fine, but, can sometimes be problematic. We actually have more of kind of an objective outsider view. And the last thing, obviously, and this is kind of, I think, where it gets its most excited from a business standpoint, is the scale of it, right? We all know that there's a tremendous bottleneck in science. Researchers get frustrated. Publishers are frustrated. We're all frustrated with that, bottleneck point of the peer review not being, coming in a timely fashion, publications getting delayed, scientific advancements not getting out there. And I think we all, saw that very clearly over the course of the pandemic. So being able to just speed up that process is, I think, a potential that is definitely worth considering. Okay, I'm trying to move on to my next slide. I use this nice AI technology, and sometimes it gets so fancy that it freezes up on me. So there you go. So this is a good critique of my self-critique of my own making. But here we go. Okay, so what I want to ask us and ask aloud, and I don't necessarily have a good answer to this question, is, are we being scientific in our evaluation of AI? Meaning, when we're having those discussions about whether AI should be part of the review process, are we answering from the gut, or are we answering from actually testing and checking these things? And what's been really surprising and intriguing to me in going through some of this preprint literature is that actually some of the testing has shown that in certain circumstances, you can get reviews which, to be perfectly honest, are far superior to what the human review might have done. And that is in evaluations done by humans, meaning it's not the AI saying, I'm doing a better job. It's actually humans that are given, a stack of reviews. Half of them are done by human reviewers, half of them are done by AI. And in this particular tool, and this is just a brand new preprint that was published this week about a multi-agent, multimodal scientific review generation, a fancy way for saying it's a peer review tool. And they were able, at least according to their research, have a win rate, or I guess what they mean by that is a rate where the AI model was preferred over the human review at a 93% clip. And I think that should make us pause for a minute and say, okay, it doesn't get rid of all the issues that we brought up before about potential hallucinations or issues that come up, but let's not ignore it either, right? Because let's not sit here and pretend that human reviewers never make mistakes or don't insert a certain level of bias. And I think we need to evaluate it and be open-minded enough to evaluate it based on its academic rigor and not, or scientific, possibilities and capabilities, and not just kind of how we feel about artificial intelligence in general. Just to give credit where credit is due, kind of what's opened my eyes to this is there's a very fascinating newsletter that's produced by an industry colleague named Chris Leonard. Give him a shout out here because he deserves it. It's called Scalene. It's a weekly newsletter where he kind of, I don't know how he finds it, but he finds the latest and greatest AI researchers that are experimenting with AI. That's also another thing that's really interesting, is it's not just industry internal industry question. A lot of researchers are asking this question, right? Especially the computer scientists and the AI believers. Can we get peer review to be better if we use AI? So if you're interested in kind of keeping up on that literature, I highly, highly recommend subscribing to Chris's newsletter. Okay. So where does that exactly leave us? I think that, the way that I perceive it, the way I look at it, is that we have to think about the AI efficiency possibilities that we have, right? Leveraging AI for objective analysis and feedback while also having a human insight. And I think that if we, adapt in what I like to call an augmented view, right? Where it's kind of hand in hand, right? Where the human retains full and entire control over the acceptance or rejection of the AI suggestions, then I think that we can put ourselves into where, so it's almost like it's subservient to us, right? And we look at it in that way, but it's augmenting our work. Then I think we have the possibility of opening up new possibilities, whether it's internal, whether it's, to help our reviewers to overcome some of the challenges that come with review. There's a lot of potential there. And the way to do that, one more thing that I want to say about peer review, is that I think that we think about peer review as this one activity, but peer review is like a big salad mixed together of all sorts of different things, right? So when I ask you, what does it mean to do a peer review? I'm going to get some people who say, well, it's to, evaluate the novelty of the research. It's to check whether the references are in order or not. It's to check whether there's plagiarism issues. It's to check if, images were duplicated or taken from places they shouldn't have been taken from. It's to check, do I have anything interesting to say? Is the methodology sound? There's so many things that go into peer review. And the way that I perceive it is, if we try to say AI yes or AI no to this big construction or this big one thing called peer review, we're going to fall, because there are certain places where I don't think AI should be involved. So for example, I'm against AI making a decision, right? Being the arbiter of what is valuable science to us as a society, to us as a culture. I think that would be a huge mistake. On the other hand, I don't think that anyone would scream and shout if we had a tool that could compare the in-text citations to the references and make sure that nothing was left out. I don't think anyone's going to lose any sleep or, cry themselves to sleep at night that they don't get to do that really technical, boring aspect of the job. So I think if we break it down to its most basic level, what peer review is, then we can make informed, intelligent decisions based on AI's capabilities as well as its limitations and say, this is a really good use of peer review and this is not. So what I'm suggesting is breaking peer review into different parts and actually giving the researchers, the reviewers, giving them the authority and the leverage and the power to say, I'm going to take the parts of peer review that actually are valuable, right? Deciding on novelty, deciding does this add to the current literature? Yes, that stays human. But the more technical aspects and checks, I think very much AI can be a part of. Here's one suggested, just kind of on the top of my brain, because I like to get down into the details because I think that in order to actually make things practical, we need to be in detail oriented. So here's a proposed AI-assisted workflow, and this isn't the only workflow, and I haven't tested this workflow, and I encourage you to try out different workflows, but I just wanted to show you how you may be able to fit the pieces of the puzzle together so that it's not a question of either or. It's not a 0-1 dilemma, but rather you actually can fit both in. So in theory, a paper could be submitted to, a desk reviewer the same way that we do now for preliminary assessment. They decide, is this worthwhile to go out or not? It could go through some technical checks. That's fine. Maybe then, even before we start sending it out and start nudging our human reviewers, maybe we want to send it out to AI for feedback, and the author could actually have direct interaction with the AI assistant in order to get some really good feedback on the paper. Almost inevitably, when there's an existing piece of content, and I encourage people to go and throw that into ChatGPT or into Claude or whatever else you may use, and when, again, not asking it for information to generate from its own intelligence or memory, but rather I give it the source of content and then I ask it to critique it, it can do a pretty darn good job. And most of the time, the researchers are happy with what comes out. And I think that researchers, we should also trust them enough to say, if there's something that's not accurate, they'll know to pick that up in the same way they hate reviewer 2, and reviewer 2 comes up with suggestions that they don't particularly like. After that, the authors could refine their work based on the AI feedback, and then maybe it could go to the human evaluators who are going to make a determination of novelty, of robustness of methodology, et cetera. Again, I'm not saying this is kind of God's Bible to Moses on the Mount, that this is the way it has to be. I'm just throwing out a theoretical so that we can ping pong it, we can play around with it and say, you know what, actually, I think maybe AI would be done better at a different step. That's fantastic. If that's the conversations that come out of this session, then I consider it a success. So what are the steps to actually getting AI in peer review? And how do we make this actually very pragmatic and practical? And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently, and I want to suggest a framework for doing this, and that is, and I'm sorry if this is a little too big, but I'll explain it. The EU has put together an AI Act, which you probably have at least heard of, if not looked at yourselves. And I think that it presents a really good framework for us to conceptualize and think about how we want to use AI within the peer review process. So what the EU AI Act says, sorry, that's a mouthful, is that there's not one entity called AI that's okay or not okay. AI is a very vast and broad technology, or multiple technologies that can be used in different ways in different contexts. And what we need to do is we actually need to tierify the risk levels of each and every use case that we have in order to decide, A, do we want to allow this use case or not? And B is, if we do want to allow it, what level of oversight and regulation do we want to have over it? So for example, when it comes to, the AI Act, like mass surveillance and manipulation of harmful behavior are unacceptable risks. Those are unacceptable applications of artificial intelligence. Whereas emotional recognition might have limited risk. And I think that it wouldn't take that much work for us to get together as a community, as an industry, and say, okay, what are actually the risky uses of artificial intelligence in peer review, and what are those things that we're okay with? And if there are things that are riskier, it doesn't mean we don't necessarily do them. It just means we need a higher level of oversight, of human oversight over those processes. And I think there are certain things. Let's take language editing of the review, for example, where the risk is quite low. And to just reject AI because it's AI, to me, would be a big mistake. So I think we need to be getting a lot more detail-oriented about these tools. The second suggestion that I have is to actually create a list of approved tools. And this isn't, terribly complicated to do. Ithacus and R has a running list of products that they're constantly updating, the latest AI products that have to do with publishing and with research. And maybe we want to go through and actually find which ones are we going to allow, which ones are not going to allow, whether it's internally or whether it's for our researchers and our reviewers as well. And the last suggestion that I have, again, picked up from the EU use case, is to differentiate between substantive and non-substantive use. And I think that we can all kind of, almost intuitively say, I know that there's a difference between someone using AI, let's say, to do their data analysis, which, again, could be a really good use for AI, but we need to be really careful with. We need to have oversight. We need to make sure that it can be reproducible. We need to make sure that it, ticks all those boxes. Whereas, again, if we're using it for proofreading, assuming that we trust the vast majority of researchers do their proofreading right, maybe that's less of a substantive use of AI. Maybe we want to regulate it differently. So my critique of current journal policy is it's kind of like, well, just declare whether you're going to use it or not, and either do use it or don't use it. And I want to argue that actually, once you get into the weeds, you can make a lot better policy. So when thinking about the future of peer review, my belief is it's going to be a synergy, blending AI strengths with human judgment calls. There's a lot of room for disruption and innovation in terms of making the whole scientific publishing process a lot more efficient. And I think that, so long as we keep that mentality of we are the source of authority, and AI is there as kind of our subjugate, right? Or as there to help us do our jobs better. Then I think that we have the potential to use AI in a really constructive way. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and hand it back to you, Vivienne.
Thank you. I hope the captions were able to keep up with your speed.
Yes, I tend to speak a bit quickly. I apologize for that.
I haven't looked at the captions, but I was wondering if that AI was faster than your brain, or at least up to par, Okay, fascinating stuff. I think there are a whole bunch of questions that are coming up in the chat box in the Q&A. So I think AI is sort of in the horizon of the future of peer review in a very substantive manner. Thank you so much. Sven, I'll hand you the floor now.
Thank you so much, Vivienne. Thank you to COPE for inviting me, and also Happy Research Integrity Week. I guess this is a great invention for everybody in the industry. Well, I guess the problem is that Avi and I are speaking too much, because you will see a lot of the thoughts that he has been sharing. I think looking at the future and a little bit at the past of peer review, technology and human behavior are the two elements that we have to look at, and a blind trust in technology as well as a blind trust in human behavior only obviously don't solve the problem. So you're all aware how much of a battlefield research integrity and peer review, I think, particularly are. I think it's really important to kind of break it down a little bit further, as Avi said, and not just trust the fact that there is a kind of bad actors which we probably don't understand out there in the market, but that we have a very clear understanding what we want to achieve with peer review and with research integrity as, or what I like to call publishing integrity as a process as a whole. And it's clearly in the responsibility of journals and publishers to make sure that the integrity of the last part of the process, the publishing integrity, is being protected, because that's the reason, in my view, why we have publishers today. There is no other reason that I see beyond that. So what's the problem? Obviously, technology is a great tool to democratize a lot of things, right? And obviously, it multiplies the entry points for fraud, for fraudulent behavior, which I think Louisa also pointed to. However, the problems that we see in research integrity are not new ones. They didn't happen over the last 2 years when there was suddenly the large spread of AI technologies after the launch of ChatGPT. But if you look at the famous case of the researcher from the University of Salamanca, those cases of fraud go back for a decade and longer. So this is not a new thing. Technology obviously improves the ease of use. That's great, also for bad actors. And I think if we would analyze publishers' backlists, like 200 years back, if publishers and journals exist for that long, we will see that there is a lot of historical fraud, which we never detected in the past. So obviously, technology also helps us to understand systematically much better than we did in the past, cases of fraud and social behavior that we did not want to see. I think, as you can see on this slide overview, which I stole from Nature, didn't steal it, I'm quoting it, quoting from Nature, you can see that all sorts of publishers, journals in all disciplines are obviously impacted. It is not a matter of size primarily. It's probably rather a question how different publishers deal with the challenge and with the issue that we see. Volume obviously puts pressure on an industry that is not growing, the size of personnel working on the number of public papers submitted. And I think it's also part of the game as a business person to say that there is an illegitimate shadow publishing industry that has developed, because you don't go as a researcher, you don't slip into something. It is not something that happens to you, but you engage with paper mills, and these paper mills make money of what they do. And obviously somebody pays for the service. So I think academic publishing at this point, or until very recently at least, hasn't been well suited in this arms race with tech players. I would even argue that for quite a while, publishers didn't really look at this space. And I think Louisa has mentioned the incidents that we saw over the last 2 or 3 years that have really opened our eyes and caught our attention. That's great. So how can we solve this as an industry? And I think there are different elements, and I'm really grateful to Avi that he already brought it down from a philosophical discussion to something very practical that we can apply. First of all, establish entry criteria. This is the only industry, I would say, that leaves the quality assurance to people who are not trained in that quality assurance process, but to people who are trained on other things, who are great researchers, who do something very different. But imagine this would happen in the pharma industry. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a pharmacist, but I don't want to imagine that basically quality assurance is left to researchers with everything that comes with it. I think we need to reduce churn dramatically, and this is really up to publishers. So far, there's way too much churn in approaching reviewers, bombarding them with emails. The more they publish, the more they are being bombarded to review in the process on a pretty technologically simple method in most cases. So we need to move beyond the keyword search, I would say. Then I think we need to make sure that we lower the time investment. And I think Avi has mentioned that already. Here technology comes in. We need AI assistants to support researchers. Imagine, coming back to Louisa's argument as well, that there is growing volume, too much volume. Imagine we would be able, with the help of AI assistants, to cut the review time per paper in half. The volume argument would be gone immediately. And I think that's something where we have to deploy technology. We, I guess, need to better understand, and that's what I'm working on, the motivation individuals have in participating in peer review. Let's not believe in altruism as a mass phenomenon in research, because it's not existing. It is not true. It sounds great, but there is more to it. Obviously, people want to get something out of peer review. A learning experience, social recognition, whatever it might be. And I think we need to better understand that. We need to help them share the experience and also probably gamify the process a little bit to make it more rewarding, more fun. Imagine peer review would become fun. That would be surprising for a moment, but probably help, because we all enjoy our jobs more if they are fun and not a pain. And then finally, really make it a community experience. And Louisa mentioned the good examples as well. I don't have to go into them again, but let's move away from this perspective that these peer reviewers are my reviewers and I don't share how they perform, for example. But I make it an experience where publishers kind of go beyond this short-sighted view of owning information about people simply because they believe they can go back to them and get more out of them going forward. So let's move this on. So what is the human side I would like to raise? And unfortunately, I took this picture, this image there myself. That's why it's a little bit blurry. It's at Humboldt University, as you can see from, I guess, Alexander from Humboldt sitting there. So what's the problem from my perspective with researchers today? I don't think that finding peer reviewers is difficult. It's just being conducted in a way which is not really helpful. Everybody of you who does reviewing knows that it is conducted as direct marketing with a crazy spread of impact on everybody. It is really being conducted, I would say, in a pre-technological way using technology. You could also go back to printed Thomson Reuters manuals from the 90s or whatever and look up reviewers, because it's not much better than this. I don't think that finding reviewers, everybody sells reviewer finders these days, is the problem. Activating them is, making them work for your particular project, for your particular article, book, conference, or whatever it might be. I think it's really a big problem, and unfortunately I have to say that with publishers in the room who could do better. Publishers invest next to nothing in comforting reviewers and recognizing their work and rewarding them. This is a problem, I think, that needs to be addressed as well, and it is part of the truth that we do know better, also in this industry, how we can basically cause further a certain action by recognizing and rewarding them. And I think all these ridiculous stories about ethical and unethical behavior when it comes to rewarding and recognizing is simply something that the industry should really stop. And I'm not looking at particular publishers. I think it is on the retreat already, but this is something where it's better to be more neutral as an industry and to really look at what you want to achieve with this, which is action by reviewers. What are we doing? And I think this can be probably a blueprint, not just for what Reviewer Credits does, but what a lot of people do. We have been conceptualizing the reviewer as a persona. And looking at the reviewer as a persona, we are looking at 6 elements. Number one, and I think, Avi, you mentioned that already, reviewer, and you mentioned it as well, Louisa, around the ORCID initiative. Making sure that we know whom we are talking to on the reviewer side, reviewer identity. Finding reviewers is obviously important to approach the top of funnel problem that 75% of all invitations, I'm sure it's more, are being rejected today because they are not accurate to the point of the reviewer that they would want to act. Create a reviewer network where you know more about your reviewers in the persona as a reviewer and not as an author. I'm surprised that a number of big publishers, not all of them, are really weak on this and don't have an idea of how their reviewers perform, what they dislike and like, and all the other elements. Reviewer certification and rewarding in my world are really important and are in the end a business decision and not an ethical decision. Whether you can reward a reviewer to review for a journal that nobody knows, which you just launched, for example, is clearly a business decision every publisher can take, and you don't need a kind of recurse into behaviors and hoping for altruism and all these kinds of things. And last but not least, I think it's really important that we better understand on the publishers' side, the overall reviewer activity in a particular journal, and not just look at finding that one reviewer to push that paper through a process. I think it is really important that we understand how editorial boards work with peer review and how they kind of create an atmosphere where peer review is being conducted in a way as the industry, as science needs it. I think in the end, and I don't want to go too deep here, I stole this slide from my friends at Maurice. I think true digitization and not like outsourcing, insourcing, which a lot of publishers do, is really important. And I think it is a truism that the underinvestment in technology in publishing is really a hurdle in achieving of what I just mentioned, also for peer review and for research integrity. So I think what's at stake and what we need to address, and then I'm done already and looking forward to the discussion with you all. I think we are looking at 4 different elements here, which is really trust. Scientific publishing is a trust-based business, not just a process, also a business. And we must do whatever we can to keep that trust in the system. I think it has been dramatically negatively impacted already over the last few years, but it is something we can restore with robust processes and robust and a clear understanding how to really conduct peer review and research integrity. Obviously, it's about governance. That's something where publishers, I think, have to step up. We are seeing a lot of steps into that direction around STM solutions, but also private initiatives, commercial initiatives. I think that is super important. And then the 2 elements, success and growth, I would really like to focus on. We need to make sure that the commercial outcome of peer review, the commercial value of peer review is also seen, and it's not just seen as an element of the scientific part of the ecosystem, because also as a basis of the economic part of what we do. And finally, I guess this is can be the source of growth in an industry that hasn't been growing for 6 or 7 years after inflation, academic publishing. I think our future is really dependent, our future growth is really dependent on this. And we don't have to just argue with how important all these steps we have to take are for science. I think that is obvious. But it's also of a high self-interest to the publishing ecosystem that we get these issues in order and solve them right away to have a future as an industry. Thank you, and back to you, Vivienne.
Thank you, Sven. I loved your idea of activating reviewers and how we can prompt them sort of to become these, or to engage as major players in this whole ecosystem that you have so brilliantly described. So I'd like to, before moving on to the discussion, I'd like to launch a couple of just polls very quickly, sort of to get us in the mood for what's coming after. This has been a very dynamic session, and I think people are going to be very interested in all of the resources that are coming up here. So do I launch the polls, or does somebody? There we are. Here it is. Okay, so the future of peer review, right? Again, peer review for you is mainly about screening manuscripts to increase rejection rates, improving the quality of the articles you publish, working with authors to improve reporting quality. This is very big in medicine. Finding errors and integrity issues, or complying with the requisites of indexing databases. So give a few seconds here for people to get their answers in. Okay, let's see how many. All right. All right, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So by far, people do believe that peer review is there to improve the quality of the articles that we're all publishing. So it plays that quality check that we really rely on. And then there's another poll that I'd like to share with you now. There it is. What is peer review? Peer review is over, an ongoing developmental process, here to stay for a long, long time, in need of major overhauling, fine as it is. Let's see if we can get everybody voting on this one. Okay, nobody thinks that peer review is over. Let's start by that. I think this is a great finding in this very biased opinion poll, but you know, we can all reach our own conclusions about that. And very much in concordance with the presentations that have been given today, it is an ongoing developmental process, and it is also in need of major overhauling. So these two things tribute into each other, obviously. Just one person says that it's fine as it is. Did you see the results? Did I share the results? I did not, did I? There we go. Okay, there it is. So it is not over, and it is an ongoing developmental process and in need of major overhauling. Okay, thank you so much. So this brings us to this part of the session. We still have about half an hour now for the discussion. I'd like to go back to some basics first. The essence of peer review. Peer review has been around for what, 500 years? Some of you may know better the history of peer review. But it has been questioned for a long, long time, so much so that in May 1989, the first International Congress on Peer Review in Biomedical Publication was held in Chicago. I don't know if any of you were around. I wasn't. The welcoming words from Drummond Rennie included, "I believe that publication is central to science and that the peer review process is central to scientific publication." That's his quote. The program touched upon multiple issues. I went to look at the program, and it's really fascinating, some of which are still current, such as publication bias, re-review of accepted manuscripts. That's how they called it. So it's sort of like, the whole retraction correction thing. The effects of blinding that now we have to actually refer to as anonymizing, correcting the literature, the interface between research institutions and journals, among others. And then 10 years later, in 1999, Richard Smith, the BMJ editor at the time, introduced open peer review. And he wrote, "Peer review is at the heart of the scientific process, yet was until recently largely unexamined. Now we begin to have a body of evidence on peer review, and it illustrates many defects. It's slow, expensive, profligate of academic time, highly subjective, prone to bias, easily abused, poor at detecting gross defects, and almost useless for detecting fraud." And then he writes that there are many benefits, of course. So a fundamental question that I'm posing to you now is whether external peer review is necessary. To further place the question into context, my experience as an editor is that we make most of the decisions ourselves, the editor, regardless many times of what the peer reviewer says. So if the only benefit or one of the main benefits of peer review is to improve what is eventually published, which was one of the main answers in my second poll, a good copy editor or an AI tool could fulfill that task now, couldn't it? So this is a question to all of you, whoever wants to go first. Louisa or Avi. Okay, go for it.
No,
and
go
then
ahead,
Louisa. No, I'll have Avi and then I'll ask Louisa to chip in and then Sven in that order.
I mean, first of all, I love how you put this in historical context, because as you were speaking, it made me think that, this is an issue which we're all striving to solve, but maybe there is no solving of peer review, right? Because the whole, right, the whole concept, the whole idea of peer review is that we're constantly striving to make the articles better. So by definition, peer review should always be striving to make itself better. And I think that it's in some ways comforting to know that, these issues were always around and probably will continue to always be around. But what I would argue is that peer review not only is, whether it's human or AI, it doesn't matter exactly how, as long as it's done well, is more important than it's ever been. Because I think as we, as the world moves more in a direction of, a lack of respect or understanding or appreciation for actual, real, factual content that has been verified and reviewed, which I think at the time of those writings that you mentioned would kind of be an obvious statement, is now very much not so. And in my eyes, the value of the peer-reviewed content, whether it's within the academic context or journalistic context, is almost our, kind of our lifeboat as a society for like, these are the only facts that we have left, in the best way that we can do it. So even if internally we know it's a very imperfect system, so long as we're striving to continue to improve it, I think it's a very noble and important thing, and maybe more important than ever.
I wouldn't tend to I would tend to not agree, Avi, at least not across the board. Finally, we found something. So I think, the very strong case is a few excellent repositories when it comes to quality in very small communities, admittedly. Also the case of COVID. I mean, if speed is of the essence, and if you assume that on the other side of the paper, the consumer, not the producer of the paper, has a very proper and a very deep understanding of what you are working on and how to basically put this into perspective, I don't think that peer review is in all cases necessary. Plus, I would say that peer review as a social practice, if I may out myself as a social scientist, as a social practice and not just a technical check in terms of is this right or wrong? Is this a statement that is correct or incorrect? And all the other things. If it is a social practice of learning and teaching basically on another level, doing peer review, conducting peer review, I think it is in a number of cases necessary. I think it's important as a social practice in the industry. I wouldn't say that it is necessary in each and every case factually, basically, because you can get the same result in terms of accuracy, sometimes in some cases with or without a human reviewer, right? We know that already. So I would say to Vivienne's question, it's not necessary. I would say it's highly advisable to continue it as a social practice for now, because it is a trust anchor in the process.
Thank you, Louisa. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the philosophical discussion around this. I wanted to come back to your suggestion, Vivienne. You said, why can't editors be responsible for carrying out peer review? And I think, again, it comes to different types of papers, perhaps. I'm thinking back to my experience when I was an editor on genome biology, and I might receive a manuscript, for example, and at the time it could have been the sequencing of the whole genome of a particular organism. I don't think it's really possible to have, or very rare to be able to have one person as an editor to evaluate all the different aspects of that kind of manuscript, the technical details, statistical analysis, biological significance, where it fits with the rest of the research record. So I think that's one really good reason why peer reviewers are important, and it seems difficult that editors can take all the responsibility for that, especially as research becomes more multidisciplinary. It becomes more important to have diverse perspectives on a paper and really have the expertise that you need to assess it.
Thank you. And there's so many issues involved in peer review. You know, those of us who live in this world of publishing journals, and as I have many hats myself, by the way, I'm an editor, I'm a researcher, I'm a peer reviewer, and I'm an author. So I get it on all sides. And we do see biases, and I'd like to touch upon this because it's very, very important. There are many possible biases in peer review that may influence the outcome. Authors' prestige, authors' gender, geographic, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. I'm picking this up here because of what you said, Sven, that this is a social endeavor, you know, and we do build communities around doing this peer review thing. So there's also the cultural background, whether the ideas conveyed support the reviewer's views, positive versus negative results, etc. And I'm going to interject here a question that was put in the Q&A box. One of our audience members asks, would we consider using lesser number of peer reviewer reports to make decisions, say lesser than industry standard of 2 that agree? There are some journals that, so using less. So we're already facing a real challenge recruiting just a few reviewers, but based on your suggestions on how we can improve peer review, how can we decrease these biases? In my journal, we use a double anonymous approach, and we make sure that the reviewers do not come from the same country as the authors. Now, I'll repeat this, not from the same country, because some countries like mine are small and everybody knows each other. And furthermore, we're a small group of scientists competing for very limited funds. So how can we reduce biases, thinking of the future of peer review? And this is open to the three of you, please.
I'm happy to kick off here. It's really interesting what you said about your experience on your journal and not inviting peer reviewers from the same country as the author. There is some evidence that suggests that that can actually have the opposite effect, and you can see reviewers from some regions having more bias against authors from other regions. I think it's a really interesting question. I do think that, again, AI has the real potential to be helpful here. I think one of even if you anonymize the authors, you can still tell often from the style of writing, for example, if the English isn't perfect, which is completely understandable. I think AI could potentially play a really big role in leveling the playing field when it comes to discrimination that's because of English language ability, for example. So I think there are some really exciting opportunities there.
If I
Thank
may,
you. Sven,
I would like
go.
to add to that point, because Louisa, I think it's absolutely right what you are saying. As a non-native speaker, I ask myself not so much for an article, but also for a review report. Why shouldn't I use a system helping me translate in a proper way so that it is more difficult for reviewers to get blinded by bias, right? Why can I not use a tool just for language, not for content, that really ensures that my English comes over as polished as somebody who is studying in Oxford or Cambridge? So, but I would like to add an element, and I think that technology could help as well. And I know that Avi is constantly building new technology things. So here's a good example for that, I guess. Showing the direct link between you as a reviewer and which impact your advice, your reviewing has on the quality of the paper. I would really like to see that, because I think that would be a great reward. Talking about gamification, for example, would be a great reward to say your input has elevated the quality of this paper by, I'm making up a thing, 20% or X impact factor or whatever. I think that would be great, because it would make people much more constructive and in a positive way complicit, if you want, in getting the research basically to the best quality level. In the region of the world where I'm from, in Germany, if you're a peer reviewer, you probably prefer to show people that you know better. Right? It's not so much that you want to improve something, which is much more, in my view, at least an Anglo-Saxon concept, for many at least. So I think working on these kinds of elements with the help of technology, with the help of models, would be really super. So over to you, Avi. I guess you will build it right away.
Well, yeah, I am actually going to throw some cold water on this ability for AI to solve bias. I actually think in certain ways AI makes the bias question more challenging, and I'll try and explain why. I think that in our human endeavors, we do our best, hopefully, to reduce our own prejudice and try to try to push away whether it's language biases or racial biases or whatever it may be. And we know that we're only moderately successful in being able to do so. The problem when it comes to AI is that, well, there's two big problems. Number one is, what's the training data? Okay, so the training data is already influenced by certain biases that you can't really take out, right? So that's number one. So that's why, especially at the beginning of GPT, you could get some pretty horrific responses to some pretty inane prompts, right? So that's issue number one. Now, issue number two, and this is something that I take from the automotive industry. One of the reasons that the automotive industry hasn't been able to make self-driving cars just the standard everywhere is because how do you program in whether the 70-year-old Nobel Prize winning grandmother, and you've got the 5-year-old kid in the street, and the car has to make the decision about, God forbid, which one to save and which one to. These are very difficult moral dilemmas and decisions that I don't think that need to be programmed in, right? And that's not an easy. That takes a lot of kind of heart-wrenching consensus and work in order to get to that point where we could actually agree. Well, what biases are we taking into account, and what weight do we give to each one of these biases, and then how do we program the materials in it, or how do we program the software in a way that it can actually can account for all these things. So I'm not saying that we can't use AI to try and minimize bias. I just don't necessarily think it makes it easier. I think the onus is still on us to figure out how we implement those criteria.
Right, exactly. We do have an upvoted question for Avi. I think we're going to stick around this AI thing. Oh, there we go. It's for you, Avi. So how would you suggest that an AI platform provide a peer review report? Would you upload the manuscript to the platform and have the AI write the report? If so, what about the issue with sharing the data and information of that manuscript with that AI platform that may not have data sharing restrictions? Now, this is something that's really important, and I'd like for all of you to address this issue, which is, to what extent can we use as researchers, as peer reviewers, as editors, off the shelf, so to speak, AI tools like ChatGPT or whatever that we pay a subscription for, not the in-house ones, made by the publishers to quality check their manuscripts. I would assume that the in-house ones would have some confidentiality safeguards embedded in them. So that's my assumption. Maybe I'm wrong. But many others will use AI tools that are out there in the marketplace. And what happens with privacy? So how do we construct a peer review report using AI tools? That's the question on the chat box. And the other one is, what do we do about the confidentiality safeguards and the recycling of these manuscripts that maybe get, uploaded into the system, into the whole ecosystem and the machine learning thing, and then maybe are reutilized for some generation further on? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and unpack that a little bit. First of all, I would say I wouldn't recommend starting to upload, articles, not unpublished articles, to these systems unprotected. I think that would be a big mistake. I also think there's a moral issue with researchers as reviewers uploading others' papers to get help with, reviews. I know that I've spoken to researchers who I know have done that. So it's not theoretical, right? It's happening. And you may have even seen this in your own journals. There are a number of tools that I think or a number of entrepreneurs that are building out tools. I can share one of them with you in the chat that I, happen to know about. Building out a tool called Eliza, which is supposed to be a private platform in order to do this exact kind of task. And I think that it is really important that everything is being done, on a private server and isn't getting passed on. So yeah, I definitely, if you want to start experimenting with how these tools work and understanding how the peer, review process might work, maybe you can take some backdated articles and run them through and in order to do your initial experimentation. But yeah, once you would get to an actual product that you would use, I'd definitely recommend doing something that's entirely private.
Any other thoughts on this? No. Okay. I just want to share with you that COPE is going to be posting the questions on the COPE platform so that you can also answer some of the ones that are coming up. There are a lot of questions here. Okay, let me see. Right. Yesterday, I saw Margaret Winker from WAMI. I think she might be here also. She mentioned the huge increase in papers to review, which is related, at least in part, she says, to institutional and funding incentives. So I'm switching gears a little bit here to the broader incentives in the university system, why the publish or perish culture, basically. Institutions do require researchers to publish for promotion, but they aren't directly involved in helping evaluate research integrity until someone else, she says, a journal whistleblower, raises an issue. And then it can take months for an institution to come back on this. And she asked yesterday, and I think it could be pertinent for this session as well, should institutions and funders change researcher incentives so that scientific integrity and transparency are incentivized rather than more publications, which goes to the point that Louisa presented initially, the huge volume of manuscripts. So how can we work together with universities, with ranking systems, university ranking systems, and all of these incentives, and the publishers themselves as well, to diminish the requirements and the number of publications? This seems to have become a wicked problem. Any thoughts on this? It's a more philosophical, existential kind of ethos thing.
I can kick off here. I think it's a really great question, and undoubtedly the incentives to publish have been part of this problem, and institutions looking at numbers of publications or publications in a journal with an impact factor over a certain level. So the former increases the volume of submissions, and both together also increase the integrity problem, because there's that huge incentive to publish no matter what. So personally, I have some experience of talking to institutions and funders about these issues. With the Hindawi situation, by no means all of the retractions that we published came from China, but a large number did. That's nothing particular about Chinese research, just happens to be that that's where the most submissions came from. And of course, China has such an incredibly large research output these days. It's reflected in the numbers. But I have spent some time there talking to funders, government bodies, and I'm going next week to talk to some institutions as well about exactly this issue. They're very concerned about the numbers of retractions of papers from Chinese authors. And I think it's really important to give them also an understanding of why this might be happening and how they can help us prevent it. Another area, of course, is training. And I think publishers can really work with institutions and funders to advise on training of researchers. We see the problems firsthand, and so we're really well placed to advise on how to educate researchers about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and so on. So I do think there's a lot that we can do in this space and are doing.
My point of view is a little bit more skeptical, frankly. Volume is in everybody's interest in academic publishing. Publishers need volume, researchers need volume, their institutions need volume, their funders need volume. Everybody looks at how many papers did you publish, and everybody wants to drive those numbers up for, I guess, very obvious reasons. So, and I guess the example of China is an interesting one. The strong growth in output, Louisa, that you mentioned, has been pushed by the Chinese government through incentive schemes on a personal level quite substantially over the last 15 years or so, right? This didn't come as a surprise or something, but this was something which was a government policy until very recently. So in that respect, I guess we are getting what we were asking for in terms of more volume in international English language journals with an impact factor. And I guess that's the policy for a number of institutions and countries. So I would think that unless we find a way to create higher incentives for less volume, however that might work, It will be also economically for people involved. I guess this is really a kind of lost battle. Unfortunately, it's not what I want to see. It's not my preference. I don't like it, but it's my skepticism that it will be really difficult to turn that trend of the last 50 years or so around. Not just in journals publishing, also in book publishing, in conferences, in many other fields.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I tend to agree, meaning I agree with you, Sven. If you were, an activist or a lobbyist, my advice would be go to the funders, right? Because Sven's right. Currently, all of the stakeholders, have an incentive for quantity. But I do think we saw the power of funders when they wanted to push an open agenda, that it changed the trajectory of how our industry, was working. So, if funders were to turn around and say, hey, listen, this whole, publishing tons of content, without being too careful about the quality of that content, actually isn't in the best interest of taxpayers or society or, science, that could change. And funders do wield a large degree of, influence. And there is also possibility, as we see that science funding in general will be cut. I mean, there are different countries. I think I've heard different conversations both in Europe and stateside about potential funding cuts in the near future to the sciences. So what does that mean for this whole quantity model? And I think these are, interesting questions that we need to keep an eye on.
Thank you. Thank you. We have run behind our schedule. We were supposed to finish about 9 minutes ago. That was my oversight, but this discussion has been fascinating. I have really enjoyed myself. I just want to say something regarding this last topic that we've been talking about. It seems that journal publications and output are sort of like the carbon dioxide emissions. It's like the fossil fuels of the time in the academic ecosystem, warming everything up, and what we need to do is cool it down. So Avi says, let's go to the funders. They have to cool things down. I say, go to the ranking system, the whole competition in the universities, and the drive to get more students in the universities. And there's so many components to this. It is really, really a difficult, the impact factor, the need to grow and shareholder value and all that. So I think there is a consensus that we need to cool things down. How that will happen, nobody knows. So on this pessimistic note, I just want to thank Louisa, Sven, Avi. It's been a wonderful session, and I hope to see you soon, some other time, in another brilliant talk. Thank you so much.
And thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vivienne. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.